Hello and welcome back to Garrison Talks. As always, it's Adam here as your host, here with Tyler right now. How you doing?
Three in a row is
Three in a
really
row.
impressive, especially
it
for me.
it kind of is actually. I was pretty exciting. Matt will be on in a little bit. He, as a parent, I'm sure that all the other parents listening understand his pain when he says that he has kids to put to bed and they're not being very cooperative.
Yeah, he's
Um,
he's got the shepherd's hook right now, wrangling them in. So
Yeah, so he should hopefully be on here in pretty soon. But so we're gonna start today. We're gonna talk a little bit about Cherokee, which I attended and did decently well at, I think. And it was a fun event overall. We'll talk a little bit about Adepticon and some stuff popping up there. And then we'll finish out with what we normally would have led with, but like we'll finish out with kind of continuing our, I would call it our Legion 301, 201 series. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about trying to like read your opponent, trying to figure out what your opponent is doing, both on like turn zero, what their game plan is, what their key units are, et cetera, that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
before we get started, really quickly, as a reminder, we have Indie Open coming up June 7th and 8th. Um, Out here in Indy again. That's going to be a Friday Saturday event again because hosting in a church and whatnot. I think we got space for 80 people again, as we said. So keep you updated on that. Hopefully, we'll start rolling out details here about that in the next couple weeks. Hopefully before Adepticon. That's my goal, and that's what I'm going to be pushing Matt for. And he's going to listen to this. He's going to find that out, so that'll be a fun surprise for him.
he has been working on the player packet, so I think
Oh
that should
yeah,
be coming out very very soon. And I mean, we'll have 3 months notice on the player packet and stuff. So it should be plenty of time for
no,
anybody who needs to figure out any sort of accommodations to get
oh, yeah.
here.
And then, of course, we're also, I know you're working on some prize support stuff with one of our 3D printing guys. So, yeah. So,
Yeah, we're
hopefully,
working on some cool silhouettes to get everybody, both the regular size and I don't even know what's called, the medium base size, like the
emplacement
creeper
troopers.
trooper emplacement trooper size. Yeah, because I don't feel like enough people have those, and it'd be nice to get those to people before Worlds, because I feel like that actually might be a problem at Worlds is people don't have that silhouette, and then you got to do a line of sight check, or somebody does have the silhouette and somebody thinks they're safe behind a piece of terrain or whatever, and then the other player whips out their silhouette and it's like, actually, you're not. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, we'll hopefully be getting those to everybody who attends, and then some extra special ones for the people who place probably in the top 8.
Ooh, fancy. But yeah. All right. So, with that covered, let's talk a little bit about Cherokee. Cherokee was fun. Cherokee was this weekend. Hosted over in Cherokee, North Carolina, obviously, as it's a Cherokee Open. Um, was not expect. This was my first time going to Cherokee, so I want to lead with the fact that I was not prepared for this journey that I made there, and that like I was expecting it to be 7.5 hours, 8 hours, but I was getting in on Friday night. Because I had school on Friday, so I couldn't leave till like 5 o'clock. So I ended up getting into Cherokee at like 1 a.m. And I don't know why my GPS did this to me, but the way it sent me is that so Cherokee is located at like the base of a mountain in the Appalachians, right? Um, one of the ways to get there, one of like the 3 or 4 ways, is a bypass road that cuts through the national park or like the state park that's right there, which like literally takes you up a mountain and down a mountain, like super windy and everything. Whereas like all the other roads just kind of follow the bases of the mountains around them. It's much more of a straight shot and everything. And my GPS decided to send me on that road, which was absolutely fucking terrifying. Gonna have to blur that. I'm happy Matt's not here. It was so yeah. So it was like midnight. I'm driving up a road with no other cars around me. All the trees are dead. It's starting to snow a little bit. I felt like the kind of like the stereotypical white boy in like the start of a horror movie that like is just gonna die. Um, so yeah, that was a fun little start to Cherokee. But aside from
well,
that,
well,
Cherokee
the
was great.
Stabcast boys were probably hiding in the trees, so I mean,
Yeah,
I think you had reasonable
yeah. Reason to be
reasonable
scared.
fears. Yeah.
Um, But yeah, aside from that, Cherokee was great. I've got the game up link pulled up right now. We had 52 players, which was pretty solid. Got a good showing out of everyone. Ryan is always hosting with Will, and of course his tournaments are always a ton of fun. Everyone's chill. It's all just a great time. Um,
It
but
was
so
6 rounds of Swiss, right?
it was supposed to be five, and I was planning on five. We ended up getting six because FLG was kind enough to let us play for sixth round. I didn't end up playing for sixth round because I had to get home considering it's an 8 hour drive, 9 hour drive. I know a bunch of other people that drove had like 10, like around that same amount of time. Ended up dropping as well. So it was like five. It was technically five full rounds, and then like a sixth round for like everyone that wanted to stay and that could stay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I guess 6 rounds technically. So yeah, six full rounds of Swiss, which ended up with a single undefeated, which was great. Nice little thing there. Um, but yeah, it was a fun meta. I'm going to talk about quickly about what I brought because I had a lot of fun bringing it. Um, so I ended up bringing uh, Boba Fett as always. I don't think I've played a list without Boba Fett in the last year, unironically. Um, we had R2. We had 2 units of Rebel Troopers with the SX-21 shotguns, captains, and frag grenades. And then 2 Fleet Troopers with their scatter guns. So basically 4 shotguns. And then they also had the R5 mechs. I brought a bus with nothing on it. So this is literally a 75-point brick that people can hide in. Um, and then I also brought a land speeder that had Shriv, the RPS gunner, and then unstable ion gun and HQ uplink. Basically, there's range for I will delete your armor. And then the real kicker of the list, the last 3 acts of this 11-fact list, is 3 Rebel Commando strike teams with their proton charge saboteurs, which nobody was ready for, and it was a great time, and it showed really well. Um,
Yeah,
a little,
Sabs are a lot of fun. You just got to have the right tables for them.
it see yes and no because like I'm not gonna to be a little critical of the tables at Cherokee. They were pretty open. I was talking to Ryan about it, and he's like, yeah, these aren't my tables, so like they're naturally open. And then they also had to fill. They also didn't get like 2/3 of their terrain, so they ended up splitting like a bunch of the terrain for multiple tables. So it ended up these light tables ended up being even lighter, which was a great time. Um, but yeah, so I was really happy I brought a bus because this bus did a lot of work for me, which we can get
Sounds like
to.
you needed it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because it was this bus. Not only being the line of sight blocker that it was, it also won me a game by itself, and almost won me one of my a game by itself on one of my losses. Because well, okay, so the first game I was against an Empire gunline was basically they I got all my troopers got blasted to bits, right? Because that's what Empire gunslines do. And then, but because we were playing breakthrough, so we were playing breakthrough. My bus was able to single-handedly stop my opponent from scoring a single point because it just sat in front of my opponent's army and just kind of blocked movement. And we realized like round four or yeah, round four, round five ish, that my opponent, Emily, she literally did not have a single unit that could physically make it to my deployment zone. So she had to pivot into trying to kill me. But that was all just because of the bus. Um, and then second game against Kentucky Dan, my speeder bus almost blocked his payload as we were playing payload. I keep forgetting to say the objectives because I'm not thinking about them. The My bus blocked his payload twice and then stopped his payload from moving once to the point where it took him 3 rounds to move his payload the distance it should have taken him 1 round to move it. And so like it almost single-handedly won me that game because I was able to he ended up managing to tie on victory points because R2 scored, but he managed to push his cart far enough to to get one victory point there, and he beat me on kill points. But
So, well, quick shout out. Matt Evans has joined us.
hi Matt.
Hey guys.
But also a tidbit with that. This is kind of a tangent. So with the new payload rules, and I'm asking both of you because I think both of you will know. Can a bus completely block the pathway
Mm-hmm.
of a payload? And I'm not saying like the payload obviously can't land on the base of the bus,
Yeah,
but can it straight up stop it? Can you go and just pull a 90-degree turn if you're like watching us? Can you just like turn like that, and because the payload is short enough, it can't fly over it? Or like how does that
So
work?
the way Ryan ruled it, and I think the way that it is ruled is like I checked after the game. The payload physically cannot move through the bus anymore, like because it is treated as a hover ground vehicle. It can't move through my vehicle. So the big reason why my bus was able to be so impactful there is because it literally he had to walk around my bus multiple times.
That's kind of wild.
It was great. I enjoyed it significantly. Um, I felt a little bad for Dan because Dan was getting a little tilted off of it, and I because buses are stupid. But
Well, so are pikes.
Pikes are also stupid. So
And
like
that's what he was
f-
playing.
fair play.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, so I wasn't trying to do battle reports, but I kind of ended up doing a couple for those first two games. But in general, the list performed about as well as I wanted it to. Because basically the goal was to cause stress, um, both on the board and to your opponent, because basically the way this list functions is there is four different threats you have to deal with. You have to deal with the land speeder with an R2 in it. You have to deal with the bus with a bunch of close range troopers in it. You have to deal with the Sabs as well, for three, and then Boba of course can just do whatever he wants to do. Um, so it's four things you have to deal with, and you have to figure out how to deal with it. All the while I'm moving around trying to play objectives around you, kill things where I can, etc., etc. Um, so overall, it worked really well for me in that sense. And kind of, I think the reason why it worked so well, Ryan summed up when I was talking to him about it. And the words that he used, and I think are very, very accurate, is that it was basically, I've played dozens of games against these kind of like standard lists that my opponents are bringing. However, my opponents have never seen anything like the stupid jink that I'm putting in front of them, and they have 150 minutes to figure out the puzzle, and their time starts now. Um, which I realized it, and I was like, I need to put that on a shirt, because that sounds odd, because it was a lot of fun. Um, but yeah,
Heck yeah.
I ended up finishing 3-2 at Cherokee. A little bit of rambling about my list, but I did also want to talk a little bit about the list that showed up at Cherokee, because I think there was like two really important things that came out of Cherokee, despite the fact that this was more of a fun tournament. Um, Number one being the very interesting list that Michael Berry pulled out, and number two being the fact that there were a lot of pikes at this tournament, um, but specifically pikes that a lot of like bigger name players brought. So like I don't know if they think they were good or not or what. Um, but yeah, those were the two things I wanted to touch on. I don't know if you guys saw
Yeah.
anything about the results.
I mean, I watched the results a bit. I think the big thing is, for those listening, Cherokee is the last, or one of the last, I think there might be one more, big 40-plus person events before Adepticon hits. So, this is kind of one of the last windows we have into what other players are bringing, to big events. Now, granted, Cherokee didn't have a invite on the line. It was probably more of a lot of players brought more fun things that they wanted to try out, but a lot of players also knew that they were, this is their last chance before Worlds, so they might have been bringing what they're bringing to Worlds. So it's key that we kind of look at these and say, hey, this window might be what we see here in March.
Yeah, because I don't know what just happened to my brain. Yeah, I 100% agree, because it's kind of like what we saw, because we're at the point, Worlds is, as you said, like a month away. Um, the meta is somewhat figured out in that like we know that like experimental droids are good. We know that Yodame is good. We know that Wookiees are good. We know that Ewoks are good. Now it's a scramble to find what's good against all of that, while
Yep.
also good enough to
And I
beat
think
everything else that everyone is bringing.
absolutely. And I think all players right now are trying to figure out what list they want to finalize. What are other people bringing? I mean, Tyler was typing on his keyboard because we literally have someone in our Discord trying to figure out what Indianapolis is bringing right now.
Liam, we're talking to you,
We're
Liam.
talking about Liam.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think Indianapolis. I mean, we have like, including Tyler and Joe. I mean, in our kind of group-ish area, we have like 15 players coming to Worlds with invites. So we've got
Roughly.
a hefty scene that's coming.
Yeah, so while you were talking, Adam, I was looking down. So I have this little book that I made, and I tallied up because I'm writing this article, and like this LVO thing is a complete mess. But I'm tallying up the win percentages of list archetypes, and at Cherokee, Pikes between 6 players went 25-9, and that's kind of
Jeez.
nuts. Because the worst win percentage of a player, I mean, the worst record somebody had was 3-2 by a Pike player.
25-9 is what, like 73.5% win rate, something like that.
Probably.
I'm looking. I just typed in that calculator. I was just saying, like, I didn't know if you looked it up, but like I just typed in.
Turns
a
out when everything
it is in fact
dodges.
So I mean, if we're talking about like we're looking for lists that like, I mean, you'll probably likely see, but something that is just kind of like a counter all or like is good into everything. I think that's the first thing I'm looking at is Pikes.
I guess they would have a winning matchup and everything. Yeah.
I think, and here's kind of the interesting thing is we saw Pikes fall out of the scene once they got the nerf. That was a year or so ago, probably more. And so they got the nerf. They went down to 9 acts. The list does all the exact same things that it is then. The only difference is now you have a pass activation, which essentially makes it a 10 activation list anyway. So it does the exact same thing it did when it was dominating the meta, when it was being a monster that you just couldn't chew through. So not a whole lot has changed for that list. It still functions essentially the same way.
I think I think counter to your point of it being 9 acts, almost all the Pike lists that showed up at Cherokee were 10 acts. The big difference was that a lot of them were bringing Bosk instead of Maul, or if they were still bringing Maul, they were either 9 acts still, or they had lost Capo's upgrades on most of their Pikes.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot less Force users as a necessity, especially because everyone was scared, I think, for a minute of Inquisitors and not being able to have Force push. So I think there was a kind of a more of an ease with getting rid of Maul and throwing in Bosk.
I think the other thing is that Bosk, I know, does very, very well in the clones, which people have been calling the boogeyman for like the past couple of months.
And you don't have to worry about if Maul dies, you lose 6 cards.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's probably actually the worst part about the Maul version of the list is, I mean, obviously he's twice as many points as Bosk, so that enough already makes it a lot tougher. But just the fact that you're really relying on his command cards, and if he does die, I mean, he's only effectively 5 wounds, maybe effectively 7 wounds with Witch Magic. But like, if you lose him, that is more than a quarter of your army. Whereas if you lose Bosk, like, the list is still functioning.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Granted, if you play with Bosk, and I actually we mentioned Liam. I was talking to Liam about this at WTC because he played the Pike spam with Bosk and stuff like that, and he was actually kind of upset because he disliked the fact that the list didn't have any playmaking. Like, you are just gunlining hard. And I totally get that, and I think that is probably the weakest part about that list. Like, you don't have really much play into like a breakthrough or into a bombing run, or recover the supplies even gets kind of tough.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thing is I think Pikes will do really well. I don't know that Pikes are going to be the end all be all because they don't have that playmaking. I mean, they're reliant on killing everything off the table or staying on the table. And if they can't do both of those things and do it well enough, I mean, if you're playing someone in Breakthrough and you kill, 13 of 14 Ewoks and one slips through, you lose. So
yeah. Oh, and I think this is actually a good transition. Sorry to cut you off, Adam.
Oh, I was going to say this is great to talk.
So we kind of mentioned, I think, before the stream, like, who am I talking about? Before the cast, about how Tyler Pridgeon, by the way, I don't think we mentioned him. He is the lone
He's the one that
6-0 from Cherokee. So congratulations to him. He was playing Experimental Droids, backed by the triple BX sniper, madness.
Your standard experimental droids.
Yeah, with a couple B2 Haas and some other stuff. So we were looking at the list that he played against because I think Experimental Droids is very, very good and it's very tricksy. But I do think it has some really bad matchups. You look at like Tempest or Double Dark, which is just heavy armor skews that obviously the Experimental Droids list doesn't have any sort of impact really, especially no impact with Pierce. And it also doesn't really have any melee deterrent. So if an aggressive maul or something like that gets in your lines, you're kind of screwed. But he didn't face any of that. He faced 2 Pike lists, which those BXs just tear into Pikes. He faced like an Anakin gun line, which is just a kind of park and shoot list, which is exactly what Tyler's list loves. And then I think he faced 2 other droid lists that were kind of heavy Geonosian builds. And it's like, those aren't very great saves to be facing against those really heavy-hitting BXs. So I think sometimes while you can take an imperfect list, because I don't think Experimental Droids is perfect, I think it does what it does really, really good. I think that's actually okay sometimes, and you can just lean into, relying on maybe not facing a Double Dark or a triple ATSD or something like that if you don't think it's going to be prevalent.
Yeah, and it's just like, to be clear, we're not saying that Tyler's success was because he didn't face a bad matchup. He's a really good player. He beat
Absolutely not.
He beat a lot of big names with those lists. But like, it is worth pointing out that it might have gone differently if he had faced like a really polarizing matchup, as you said. Because like, I agree that anything that wants to move at you aggressively is going to cause a problem. Like, he dodged all of the Wookiee defenders lists that were out here at Cherokee, all of that. And being able to, because Experimental Droids is going to outgun line someone. Like, that's not really a question, I don't think, right? Because it's the amount of damage and force multipliers that they have that they can put out in their list is just kind of insane, honestly. So it's interesting to see if it will change if you go against like Double Darks, like, because that's the other thing I forgot to mention is armor is going. I feel like they really, really struggle into armor, right? So it'd be interesting to see how they do in these good matchups or in these bad matchups. Sorry. But like, I think they have like a really good win rate right now. Anyway, like
it's pretty nutty. So I like I showed you that my book there. I've been kind of calculating some win rates by hand over the past couple like really big tournaments, and it's for Experimental Droids specifically. It's sitting around 67%. So they win 2 out of every 3 games they play.
It's pretty close to pre-nerf Blizzard, I believe. Which is...
Well, if you're just looking on the numbers, of course, but I think that list just has a lot of bad counters that are just generally really bad in today's meta, if that makes sense. So the things that counter triple ATST or Double Darks are really prevalent right now, but triple ATST and Double Darks counter Experimental Droids really hard. So it's like there's kind of like a weird ecosystem going on there.
It's very rock, paper, scissors in that sense, but like if Experimental Droids are the rocks, we're missing a lot of the paper.
Yeah, that's a good example.
But yeah, I think this is actually probably a good time to transition over to what we kind of actually think we'll be seeing more for Adepticon too, because I mean we've kind of already been talking about that. But yeah, again, congratulations to Tyler and everything for Cherokee and all that.
Thank you for. Oh wait, not me.
Tyler Pridgeon, not Tyler Carnes, who did not show up. He should have showed up, and he would have been beat by me.
I won in spirit.
Fair. Wait,
yeah, Adam had to drive out there alone. We bailed on him. Poor Adam. Yeah. Sorry, buddy.
I will say a tournament this close to Worlds is pretty tough for travel and stuff like that. And I think that's the only thing that's really holding back Cherokee. I think it's in a really great spot. It's pretty centralized here on the East Coast. I think it's just a lot of people trying to make travel
Yeah,
accommodations.
and I mean even then they had 52 for being this close to Worlds. Like that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know. That's kind of what I'm
it's
saying. Like
great.
Yeah.
it could have easily been 80 plus with it being a little more removed. So, congrats to them.
Yep.
All right. So moving into a little bit more about Adepticon and kind of like figuring out the meta. Um, I think actually right now is a great example of this is Mike Berry's list dashes on Discord that he brought to Cherokee. In that like people are still experimenting, right? People are still trying to figure out what counters what and like what can do well in this meta. Um, I don't necessarily know if Dashes was thinking about this when he was making his list, but he created, if you haven't seen, a very, very interesting list revolving around Jin Urso. Um, so for everyone that's not familiar, it's a Han and Jin in your commander slot. Jin has Extinct Leader. Then you're followed up with you've got Chewie, operative, then three Naked Ewoks, then three vets with their heavies, and then two sniper strike teams for 11 acts. And the whole goal of this list is to make Jin not only unkillable, but the only thing you can shoot at, right? Because it was like I believe he was talking about it earlier and like on his on Notorious Scoundrels when I was listening to it earlier today. Basically, it was you play Reckless Diversion on Jin round 2, and then Notorious Scoundrel back in your hand. Play it again on Jin round 4, and so Jin is getting Guardian 9, Danger Sense 4, a Nimble Dodge, Heavy Cover, and she's the only thing you can shoot at. So it's kind of strong in the gun lines that we kind of been seeing lately, right? Because like he had success with this against gun lines at this event, right? Um,
Hmm.
so it's just kind of an interesting thing to point out because it's like experimentation is still like a very very prevalent thing, I think, right? So yeah, do you guys think that like for the meta for Worlds, what do you think we're going to see a lot of? What do you think is going to show up? What do you think people are planning for? That kind of thing. What do you think the meta snapshot is going to look like heading into Worlds?
Well, I don't want to spoil Tyler's article that he's got coming out. So I think people should read that a little bit more. But I
Yeah,
do
it should be
think
coming
Where
out soon.
where could we
yes.
find that once that eventually comes
At
out soon?
indianapolisgarrison.com, you can find that on our website. We'll be posting that all over social media once that comes out. Um, but I do think the big thing is people are looking to kind of either figure out how to counter like this conversation we're having. It's figuring out how to counter a list. Um, and I think right now people need to focus on what they know. I think there's just like I was talking about this in our chat a while back. Like you're going to end up like day one, you've got 3 games out of 256 players. The grab bag that you've got to pull from out of list is so incredibly high that you need to be more concerned about playing 3 games with units and command cards that you know like the back of your hand that you can react to what's going on the table and you can play your opponent, not the list. Meaning, I've been playing the same list. I feel like I'm kind of in a similar boat as like Salowski is I've been playing almost the same list for like 6 to 8 months now. And so I know it like the back of my hand. I've played it a bunch. It's won me a lot of good games. My win rate's pretty high with it at this point. And so I feel confident playing into a lot of different list types. Now, granted, it's not going to have an answer for everything. It definitely will have counters. But I think play at this point it's going to be important to figure out how to play your list. Um, that's my 2 cents. I think we're going to see a lot of these meta lists, but I also think that a lot of players are going to stick to what they know.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that a little bit, we can look at like last year's Worlds for an example, in that like Lila Claire and Tom Cook, Luke Cook, they didn't bring meta necessarily. I don't like Black
Absolutely.
Suns were out of favor. The Empire Gunlines were out of favor, and they were top table at the World Finals. So I think it kind of proof there. And then it's like there's also kind of like the running trend that you can see over a lot of war games in that like someone who is really experienced with their faction and like their lists and everything is going to generally beat the people that are just meta hopping, unless they're hopping to something that's like 70% win rate, absolutely busted, play it or lose kind of deal. But we don't have anything like that right now in World or in Legion, right? That's kind of more of a 40k example, but like we don't have that in Legion right now.
Yeah.
No, Legion's very balanced for the most part. I think I completely agree with what Matt said. I think you just need to stop worrying about what you could face and just worry about what you do on the table and what you bring, and just making sure you pilot whatever you bring to the best of your ability and just the best way that it could possibly be run. I think that's going to win you the most games rather than trying to focus on how do I counter pikes, because I'm sure you could put together some sort of like rebel Cassian triple sniper din with the Ambam rifle, just like all sorts of high velocity auto wounds and stuff like that. Like that, there's something out there, but like I'm sure that list also gets countered by more things than what you could be facing in pikes. Like you're basically hedging for something that could happen, and it's I
Right.
don't think that's ever a good way to actually go about it. You know, if you again, I've been writing this article. I've been number crunching a bunch, and like you see, like Wookiees. So say Wookiees is a bad matchup for you. Well, in every given tournament I've seen, and I've been pretty much crunching the numbers. They're about in 15% of every GAR list. So you take GAR, which is probably about 20-ish% of the whole field, and then you take 10% of that. That is Wookiees. So it's like
2%.
sure, it might be like 10 players at Worlds.
2%.
And like if you pull that matchup, then like so be it. You just got to trust your list the best way you can, but you can't be hedging for that.
So just to be clear, what the numbers you pulled, it technically would be, I believe that is like 5.2 to 5.8 players. So like it's not a lot. I just want to say
it's really
out of 256 plus. It's really not a lot of players.
My brain put numbers together and I wanted to show it. Yeah, so like as you're saying, it's not a lot of players.
Well, and I think a good conversation also to have thinking about Adepticon is, it's meta lists are important. But it's not the end all be all. The other question that's really important that for me I think is actually more important than what are the meta list. It's what are the tables going to be like, and what's the format? Because we did get a little bit of an update on how the format has changed. We can kind of talk about that in a minute, but. Like the tables, I wasn't at Adepticon last year, mostly because my daughter had a birthday on March 29th and came into the world, so I was other places,
What?
So,
Seeing the birth of your daughter is more important than the World Championships
I know,
of Legion?
crazy.
What? Heresy.
Weird.
So weird.
You're not a true gamer.
I know. So I'm very excited to be there this year, but I have only slight idea of what the tables are going to be like, just because I was there 2 years ago. I've seen pictures from last year. I've heard these guys talk about it. So to me, that's more of a big concern. Like, what are you guys thinking about table structure? And that might be different this year because the format has changed a little.
Well, it's also, I don't know if we can even like tell what the tables are going to be like, right? Because they've upped it from like last year was 128 players, aka 64 tables tops. Now we are sitting at, I think it's like 268 is what they have registered, which is over double the amount of tables. So
Yeah,
I would be like extremely surprised if they could provide all of their train by themselves. So I don't think
there's
that
no way.
Yeah, so it's like we're gonna get a slew of terrain from tons of different people. So I think that like there's no way to like actually like know what tables are gonna look like.
Well, and so here's my approach sometimes, and I wonder if anybody else resonates with this. So if I ever am building a list and I look at it and go, man, if I get stuck on an open table, I'm screwed. Or man, if I get stuck on a dense table, I'm screwed. Well, then I should probably make alterations to my list. Or I should probably at least have plans in place to be like, if I get stuck on an open table, this is what I'm going to do. Brian Bear, he played a double bust list recently, and he got paired against I think it was a Cassian Ahsoka gun line on key positions. That's what it was. And I watched him use his 2 buses to just shield the whole entirety of his army for 5
Yep.
rounds, and then rush the buses on the middle KP turn 6. He has a bunch of repair bots and stuff. It's a mad list. But point being, like, yeah, the open table did not help him, did not do him any favors. But he had a plan for it. Like, he had a
Yes.
contingency. He knew exactly what he needed to do. So I think you shouldn't be going into this tournament saying, "Well, if I get stuck on an open table, I'm screwed." Like, you need to have a contingency.
Yeah, and that needs to be the conversation that you have with yourself is like, hey, maybe pikes are really meta, but if you get a gunline list that can't operate on a dense table with all buildings because it just can't focus fire to get 6 units of pikes down an alleyway, like, well, what's your game plan? What's your pivot? And so just figuring out like what your pivot point is and how do you play a map, and your opponent.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we'll talk, not to ignore this great segue that we could have had about reading your opponent. I just really wanted to quickly talk about what we know about what has changed for Worlds. In that, I know that there's been a change of like TOs and everything. I don't think we have a lot of information about like how the format and everything has changed, but it's just kind of something to keep looking out for if you're attending Worlds, because it's not going to be the same as it was last year or the year before that and whatnot.
Correct.
Because it's not. I think the only thing we know for sure is that it's not John Griffin running it anymore.
Yes, so there was a change. John Griffin is no longer the TO. It will officially be someone from Atomic Mass Games. We don't know much more details other than that. We do know that it will be following the complete, or at least we believe it's the complete Galactic Conquest rules, I believe is what it is. Yes, Galactic Conquest event. We will include the link for that in the Discord description, or in the description here. But if you need that, it is on the Atomic Mass Games website under Star Wars Legion rules and organized play.
If you plan on going to
But
Worlds, you have to give that a read.
Yeah, it's
Correct.
it's not what any of us use basically. There's a lot of new stuff in there.
Yeah, so the main key things that we want to highlight are round times. The way the timer and the round times work has changed. They will not be displaying the round time. You do not get told when the round, at least according to the document, you do not get told when the round actually starts for time. So they will give you your pairings, you go find your table. Once they think everyone has kind of found their table, is ready to go, they're going to start the timer. They're not going to tell you they're starting the timer, they're just going to start the timer. As far as it ending, I believe that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's like the main thing, like the one thing.
Well, the other thing is the way the rounds end. So once time has come to conclusion, they will roll 5, I believe it's red defense dice, and you will get a variable amount of time until they end the round. Meaning it may be 5 minutes, it may be 15 minutes, it may be whatever it is. Once that round variable time is done, they will say, hey, finish up the round you're on. So it's not a dice down. It's not a, hey, you have 5 minutes left. It's not a, hey, but when they call that variable, they're going to tell you not to start another round. We're rolling dice. Then you finish the round you're on.
So it's
effectively when they roll the dice, it's round. End of round.
That's my understanding. Someone can correct us in the comments if we're wrong, but that is my understanding.
I don't know if we've got more details than that, quite honestly. So it's something to be watching out for if you're going to Worlds. Just try and keep up to date with that. Be aware of it happening. If anything, practice playing games without looking at the time, that kind of thing. But yeah, so
I think the main takeaway here is, like, we thought we kind of had an idea of what was gonna happen, but I think now we should go ahead and separate ourselves and say we don't exactly know what's gonna happen until Atomic Mass Games gives us more information, and just be ready to be flexible.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the big thing, is just stepping into it with flexibility. They've also said, according to the document, ties are now allowed So that's kind of a wonky thing that we're going to have to figure out. I know the main Discord's been talking about that a lot.
I was like, yeah, I
So
mean,
for good or
it's
bad, ties are now allowed. So that may impact people moving on to days, whatever that means. Um, and then I do know that they said that if they have more than the 256, they will be playing a fourth round on, is it Friday?
on
Friday we'll
Friday
have a
to
fourth round
get down to 32.
to get
Yep.
to 32, moving on to Saturday. So
So,
there may be 4 rounds on Friday. Just be aware of that. I think the Adepticon description was updated. So
so just basically just make sure you're keeping in touch and checking up with it for everything if you're going to Worlds. But with that covered, I think let's move into continuing our Legion 201. So I think it's more of a 301 kind of series that we've unintentionally been doing for like the last three
Why?
for the last three episodes. Um, so we're talking a little bit about reading your opponent. Um, so as a start for like reading your opponent, what do you guys think of for like reading your opponent? Like, what do you like? What? How important is it to figure out what your opponent is trying to do versus just playing your own game plan?
I think for me, this is the main thing that I do playing Legion. Like this is usually my main strategy is reading my opponent, predicting their next move, and understanding kind of what their strategy is. Like to me, that's more important than what the table looks like, what the meta lists are. It's figuring out how they play. And like you may have some insights into that if you've seen that player place, on stream or they're a well-known player, or if you just played that player a lot of times. Like, I know if I'm going to play Tyler, it's going to be very different than when I play Brian. They're just fundamentally different players. I have to adjust my strategy accordingly, and know that Brian's going to be running straight at my face. It doesn't matter what he's doing; he's going to be running at me. Just because I know that's how Brian plays me specifically. And so, how do I adjust for that? Um, so, I think reading your player is super important.
Yeah, like I'm gonna use a boxing analogy here. So uh, sometimes it's looked down upon to be a counterpuncher in boxing, because they don't think that you can, properly instill a game plan or whatever. I don't think that is the case whatsoever, and it totally applies to Legion. I think you
Mm-hmm.
can easily be somebody like I have my game plan, but I am ready to try to read what they're doing and just shut off their game plan before I finish executing mine. So, um, I think that's just a really important quality to have is to be able to not just put your head down and say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It's, I'm going to do X, Y, but I'm going to stop them from doing X, Y, Z as well.
Yeah,
Right. I think we're
yeah,
pretty
and I
much
think
on the
we,
same page. So,
yeah, I think we
um,
talked about that like 2 episodes ago when we kind of talked about being able to flex. And I think this is what it comes down to is being able to pivot in moments. Like, are you a flexible player to be able to see openings, and be able to pivot your strategy?
yeah, it's because yeah, for me as well. I try to do pretty much what Tyler says, like because like a lot of my lists have like their set game plans. Like I know what I'm trying to do with my list. It's all, but like at the same time, part of what my game plan is countering my opponent and not letting them do what they want to do. Right. So but yeah, so I think we've kind of been able to establish that it is quite important to understand what your opponent is doing, believe it or not, considering that there's two players in a game. We are not playing solitaire. It's kind of you kind of gotta have a grasp for what your opponent wants to do. Um, and so I think the best place to start when you're looking at your opponent and trying to figure out what they want to do is on turn zero. Is trying to figure out
Hmm.
what they want to play when you flip this battle deck. Um, so when we bring out the flip, what are some things that you're looking for in your opponent's list versus your list that you're kind of trying to read into when you're flipping objectives? Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, for me, I usually look at how much mobility do they have? That's the easiest entry question. I mean, if they're bringing 3 speeder bikes or 3 swoops or 3 stabs, they're going to want to play bombing run. And I just know that because they have more mobility. They're going to be able to play that very easily. Breakthrough as well. And so the easiest question for me out of the gate is what kind of mobility do they have? The next question I usually ask myself is what kind of thumbs do they have? Meaning, are they going to be able to move and pick up boxes? Are they going to be able to, grab hostages, that kind of stuff? If they're playing Tempest Force with triple ATST, they're probably not wanting to grab things.
So just really quickly to be clear for what you mean by thumbs, you mean stuff that can take the card actions that are on these objectives, such as
Correct.
recover, sabotage, and bombing.
Claims, sabotage.
Yep.
Yep.
Stuff that only trooper units can do and not emplacement troopers or vehicles can do, basically.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think those are the
also,
two big questions for me.
Right. Absolutely. I also think just like if I'm facing a mall and recover the supplies pops up, like I want to make sure to get rid of that. Like knowing like the certain units and their superstar objective is like what I like to call it. Like Maul, I mean, is just an incredible Shadow Collective, especially, but even CIS Maul, incredible on recover the supplies. And you have like speeder bikes, incredible on bombing run. You have like Ewoks, incredible on breakthrough. You have all these really really good lists that you just need to be aware of the specific units and like what their best objective is going into a game or a tournament or whatever.
So is it
Yeah, I think that's... Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I can't tell you the number of players I've seen TOing local events that show up and they let Cad Bane get recover supplies and he runs away with it turned on. And it's just, it's hard because, I mean, unless you've played that character and you know that character, you don't know all the tricks. And there's a lot of characters and a lot of tricks in Legion at this point. The game is growing. So just knowing kind of all this, like you said, the superstar stuff that they can do.
So I guess for an example then, when we're looking at like battle decks, right? Let's say that like I'm playing against my opponent with a Jedi, like let's say like Commander Vader, and he has 4 bikes behind him. So like when I'm looking at my list, what am I looking at for? Because like we know that Legion Force what they want to play and how they want to play it, right? How do I use that information with my list to decide what I think is our best objective to play? Like,
I think it's a little bit of diagnosing what their best objectives are and what your best objectives are. And sometimes it's actually okay if you take a list like Blizzard Force, which is like a really, really optimally built list, and you force it into both of your bad matchups or both your bad objectives or whatever the case may be. Because it's like you have this list that's super, super optimal, but maybe I have something that's a little more off the wall that can play a little more, diverse of a game. And I'll pull you into a matchup that's a little more scrappy or into something that's a little more muddy because your list is built to be very, very clean in a sense. And mine's not, or whatever the case may be. But a good example of this is I'm playing a list with Geonosians, and normally droids hate disarray, but I love disarray with Geonosians because, okay, like if I'm playing Blizzard Force, they usually would love disarray too. But if I stick a couple of Geonosians in a protected spot in my deployment zone in the corner opposite of their bikes, Geonosians can absolutely cause havoc to those bikes, going and just getting out of cover shots and just tearing them apart. So I think just like knowing little things like that, you can like force a list that would otherwise be really good in a scenario into something that's actually not super favorable for them.
Yeah, I second that. I think a lot of times, like most players default to just wanting whatever's best for their list, and that's good. Like that's going to help you. But I tend to do the opposite. I tend to want to push things that are going to hamper my opponent more than me. Like what's worst case scenario for you? Can I push that envelope further to where you're worried about that this whole game and I've got freedom to kind of play my own game? So I think that's important too, is kind of weighing that options of what's best for you, what's worst for them, and what's the balanced decision that I need to make to kind of make this victory happen.
Yeah, and just one thing that I want to touch on before, because I think you guys kind of didn't mention, is a lot of the focus, right? Because like 70, like 80% of focus when it comes to turn 0 is probably going to be on the objectives, because like, you know, that's how you win the game. But it's important to note to skimp on looking at the deployments and conditions as well, because like there's some really like good examples I think are like payload and bombing or payload and hemmed in together. If you're a red player, it's basically an auto loss, right? Because of the way that those two function
Yeah,
together.
depending on the table.
Um,
And we
oh
say auto loss because payload is dependent on you pushing your payload to score based on how close it gets to the terrain. So if you're red on hemmed in, your opponent can literally put it to where you cannot get it in base contact within 6 turns,
yeah,
depending on the terrain.
and then you pretty
And
much
then,
can't
and if
guarantee you'll be
correct, you
able to make
can't
it within
guarantee
four.
maximum amount of points.
But it's like also
Yeah,
your blue player is probably going to be able to score in like 4 moves tops, like completely, like touch like
right.
base train.
So they have a huge advantage on you out of the gate.
And then of course there's other things to look for like dark troopers and rapid reinforcements, that kind of thing. Things like just don't skimp on conditions because like I feel like everyone ignores conditions a lot. Personally, I don't know if that's your guys' experience too, but like every game that I play, it's like nobody flips object or conditions like at all.
Well, so this is also just like a little bit lesser of a corner case, I guess. But something as small as like minefield when they're playing Cad Bane is actually kind of huge because Cad Bane just eats those mines, fuels up his danger sense. Meanwhile, you are gonna have to like actually take those wounds. So a droid player or I
Yep.
guess Shadow Collective player could just eat those mines and get some free suppression off it, making Cad even more tanky than he already is. And just looking at
Right.
something like that, like if the objective and deployment flip isn't very bad for you, just saying, like I don't want to give him another trick in his bag. Like I'll just go ahead
Yep.
and get rid of this.
Do
Yeah.
you do you prioritize? So like is I'm assuming like the priority order for like battle deck flips is probably objectives then deployments then conditions. For you guys, that's kind of like what it sounds like.
Actually, and specifically as a droid player, I actually tend to favor deployments more than objectives, more often than
Same.
not, unless it's bombing run and I'm playing like a gun line. Bombing run's the only one that I'll avoid. Otherwise, I think I'm actually okay playing just about anything. Um,
Yeah,
there,
I would say same. For me, and mostly just because I tend to play close range stuff. I need deployments to line up in my favor.
yeah.
This is really enlightening to me because like this is not how I play like at all. Because like I'm always looking at the objectives, which is probably a mistake if I'm being real with you. Um, it's just as like I deployments do matter more the more I think about it because like I'm actually like actively thinking about it now. And I'm like a lot of what is being said makes a lot more sense. Um, so that's one thing to look out for. But okay,
Yeah, deployments alter so much. Like I think you just have to
Yeah.
look at them like a game of key positions playing battle lines versus long march versus danger close. Like all of those are just completely different games, even though it's the same mission.
Yeah.
yeah, actually. All
Yeah,
right.
and I think normally that's part of the reason why I bid. Like, if I'm going to bid with a team, it's usually because I can't survive a certain deployment. Now, there might be objectives that are bad for me, but it's usually like, hey, if I'm playing a team, like if I'm playing a team that just really wants, like Ewoks, if I need Ewoks to get in there, I am not going to be able to survive on Long March or Rollout. Like, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Especially if they've got a huge gun line team and I just can't get into the army and I am fish in a barrel.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's all totally fair. But yeah, so we've gone through our turn zero. We've gone into the point where we're in a good spot with our objectives and everything. We're finally starting playing the game. We're like let's say we're like round two, round three, where the game kind of like really usually starts picking up, right? What are you looking for in terms of what your opponent wants to do? Like, where do you start trying to figure out what they want to do? What's like the first thing you look at?
Well, I think you have to look at their win conditions first. I think, like, what can my opponent do to just straight up win this game? Like, what are his most optimal plays? and you have to, I don't, you have to try to your best to shut them down or to limit their access to them. I'm trying to think of a good example of this, and I really can't. Like,
Uh, yeah, good example. Like if your opponent is able to just like if you're playing Vaps and they have Bosk, if they're able to pick off just their bounty and win, they don't have to worry about coming to you. Like that's it. Then they can just back up.
and an even broader scenario tagging along with that is if they are the person who bidded more, and it turns up it's Vaps, and they have like a very very dense clone gun line with a bunch of dodge sharing and stuff like that, and they have the ability to tap their Vaps and just back off. Like that makes things really really hard for you if you also have like a gun line or you have something that's a little more stagnant that can't just chase them down and murder something and get up on kill points.
Do you have to
Yeah.
consider your own win condition at the same time you're doing this? Like, is that something you consider, or are you only looking at your opponents?
I mean, they're probably simultaneous.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah,
Simultaneous.
That's
I would
fair.
say we weigh both. I think the big thing for me too is once you start playing, I start looking at like counting cards. Like, what are they opening with? Like, are they opening with standing orders? Are they burning one pips early? Um, and for me, that means that okay, like if they're burning like a two or a one pip early, like that's one of the things with Blizzard Force is they can throw out that two pip and do the the long range orbital bombardment. I at least know that late game, if he's got to play some one pips early, I might have the tempo ahead. I might be able to pull out and be doing some one pips. And so, like where are my options late game to where I can start closing? And so building that strategy on how to play them a little bit better early.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think some of your hedging against people's win conditions can actually happen uh turn -1, which is list building, and you can like here's a good example. So I played this gunline list with Bosk a lot. And for the longest time, and it had Cad Bane as well. So for the longest time, I didn't want to take Bosk one pip. I wanted to take Ploy because I can obviously just put a bounty hunter in the bag or in the bag on the token or on the card or whatever, and pull it out when I need it. Both of them get independent. It seemed like it gelled pretty well. Well, there were several times where I was like in a breakthrough scenario, or I was in a scenario playing like a clone gun line, and I was like, that boss one pip, if I had that in my hand, that could have put me in such a good position because that is just a
Hmm.
game altering card. Obviously,
Yeah.
he's just a range 4 marksman. He's just gonna gun most of the game. But actually, last night I played a game against one of the locals. His name's Trent. And turn 6, I played boss one pip card, and we were playing a game of breakthrough, and
Hmm.
it killed 3 activations
Jeez.
Jeez.
because I purposely was
Woof.
spreading around some of my damage, so I left 2 B1s on just unit leaders, 2 of his B1s that were threatening to score, and then I left a Geonosian on 2 models, and so obviously like the bomb killed the 2 B1 unit leaders and then did a wound to the Geonosians, automatically killing them once they activate, and so like had I just had Ploy in my hand, I wouldn't have even had that option. So sometimes looking at your cards that you're bringing and saying like in a game, I know this might be a niche scenario, but like is taking the generic 3 pip over I don't know some other 3 pip, like is that gonna actually do more for me, like taking this generic card, or should I actually risk running into a more niche scenario and maybe that puts me in a position to win?
Mm. Yeah,
Interesting.
for sure.
Yeah, that kind of yeah. Do you have to think about it because your opponent could do the same thing, right? Because it's like I've had games I think with but when I'm playing Boba that my opponents don't expect me to play his two pip flamer, so like his command card flamer, and I'll catch him off guard and I will delete a key unit because they think that Boba doesn't have any damage left. And stuff like that. That's actually like yeah, really important. Um, do you? So we've thought about command cards. We thought about what their win guns are. Do you look at like what unit needs to die next kind of deal? Like, is that something that you're thinking about, or is it just you're trying to get damage in wherever you can? Because the game is kind of still about attrition, right? Um, so I guess actually a better question would be, when are you focusing on attrition versus when are you focusing on countering your opponent? Like,
Hmm.
It just
Yeah,
depends
that's
on the
that's
objective, I think.
that's fair. That's fair. That might,
agreed.
yeah.
And I think it's also interesting, like when you start talking about trying to attrition your opponent, that's a whole different other thing. But um, like to sometimes I know players if they're playing gun lines, which I don't really play gun lines. But some players will just focus on like, all right, this unit is X amount of kill points. Let me focus this guy down. This unit is X amount of kill points. Let me focus this unit down to try to get up on kill points. Um, and as these guys will all tell you resoundingly, anybody who's in Indianapolis, I'm bad at math. Um, yeah. So like I don't do that. But I tend to look at more of a positioning, like where are units on the battlefield? Um, and so that's usually how I tend to play, is more of a positioning game. We had a guy in our group, this was 3 or 4 years ago, actually, who actually literally was a tank sergeant in the army for a very long time, and he played Gav, like double Gav, with a bunch of speeder bikes way back in the day, and he played Gav more precisely than any other Legion player I have ever seen. Just his positioning, the way he would move them to block off flanks, to pin down units and get crossfire. Literally, I mean, he played like he was a professional tanker because he was. Um, and so I think that it's really important when you're talking about trying to attrition your opponent or trying to play the strategy that you look at the map and where pieces are and try to build your roadmap of where you need to go with your units to hit certain other units and vice versa.
So basically, it's more important to look at positioning because like that's how you win games versus damage output and whatnot. And that like you can pass up killing like a key like character or something. Maybe not specifically like a character, but like a high value target like a full arc squad, or you can kill a naked
It,
P1. But like killing the P1 ends up being more impactful because they're the ones holding the home objective. That kind of thing.
depending on the game, it can be. Yeah. And that's me saying that as a rebel player. So, like, I'm usually not focused on killing things anyway.
That's fair. Hey, Tyler, you got anything for this, or is
No,
that? I
I
was
like
like,
everything y'all said.
hey, so okay, so to recap a bit, it's basically just I don't know how to recap that because it's basically just pay attention to what your opponent's doing, which is kind of
Yeah,
like what we are breaking
I think
down.
it's really more about learning how to move your units, which I think is a skill on its own. Like understanding like charge ranges, understanding threat bands, and learning how to use your units like actual battle pieces that they are. And I think that's a skill. When I see a lot of new players transition to Legion, especially players who come from like 40K, one of the first things they do is they line up all their guys and then they just kind of march across the field and they start shooting. This is not like a Revolutionary War reenactment. Like it's got more in common with kind of some modern fighting techniques, that you see as far as squad and platoons, because you are fighting with squads and platoons. And so you kind of have to realize that, when Tauntauns first launched, understanding how to cavalry charge is big,
Yeah,
and,
that's
and it
fair.
still is
Yeah,
with Tauntauns.
and using like the older I don't know, medieval or whatever battle tactic references. If somebody's forming like a shield wall or something, and I guess the equivalent of like a shield wall in Legion would be like a dodge spam sort
Hmm.
of like let's take a pike unit. Let's say they have 3 capo units. They all 3 put dodges on a single pike unit. You don't want to be shooting that pike unit. Shoot another pike unit, because if they're putting resources into one unit, they're not putting resources into another unit. So
Yep.
sometimes you have to just take what your opponent gives you in that sense. All the time I see droid players, because that's what I play the most, just kind of feeding people B1s, and that baffles me because in my list, I actually always let people feast on the Magna Guards, because like my Magna Guards at range 4 are as uh, as efficient at 8 health as they are at 3 health. Whereas
Yeah.
my B1s are not nearly as efficient at 7 health or at 2 health or whatever as they are at 7 health. So
Right.
at the same time, like B1s die. So, like just take the wounds that your opponent gives you and take the wounds that will actually stick throughout the game.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid recap. But yeah, anything else you guys want to touch on before we close out here?
If you haven't heard yet, Indie Open is back on. That will be in June. It will be
I
a
forget.
2-day Friday Saturday event. We will continue to keep ramping on that. I have
we did. We're
this.
ramping on it so much. We did it twice this episode.
Oh, okay, sorry, I jumped in a little late.
Yeah.
But I do have the schedule for that done as far as like kind of our end is running it as the event organizer and all of that. I will be getting the player packets and tickets up hopefully soon. And hopefully once we get closer and after Adepticon, they'll kind of announce their plan for organized play for the year, and maybe we can get some walk packs or something else to make it an invite event. So.
And if it happens somewhat similarly to what happened last year, I think they did like an errata in May, beginning of May or something like that last year. Maybe there's a chance that some balance comes in May, and we're the first big tournament to get our hands. Or I guess Rocky Top would be like the 2 weeks before.
Yeah,
or
we can get all the weeds out at Rocky Top, and then we can have a real event.
Yeah.
But if you want to come, if there's prospect of a balance maybe happening then with some units and points changes or something. That I think if it's going to come at any time, it's going to be like right after Worlds like that. So, I think that'd be a great time to go out to a convention and get some games in when the meta's a little more undiscovered.
Correct.
A lot of fun times to be had. Yeah. Any of you two have any fun life advice tidbits to leave our listeners on? If not, I've got something.
So I
Go
actually
ahead,
have
Adam.
something.
Oh,
Ooh,
let's hear it,
Tyler.
Mine's kind of a weird one. So if you ever take your car somewhere to get fixed and you tell them to rotate your tires, half the time they actually won't do it. So what you can do, and this is where it gets a little weird. Sometimes if you take like a piece of chalk or something and like mark your tires to see if they actually rotated them, you can like call them out on it. That's happened to me, and that's why I bring it up, because I asked them to do it, or I think I had like a coupon for like a free tire rotation. Well, they're not gonna. They know that you won't know, so they're not gonna do it. They're not gonna waste their time.
Yeah.
that
is good life advice.
That is, man. All right, and we'll leave it there.